Helen Wilkie, a very, very warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Thank you, Dan. Delighted to be here.
I'm thrilled to have this conversation, Helen. We've been chatting a little bit before we hit record, and I'm fascinated by your story. The listeners will listen and hear a Scottish accent, but you don't live in Scotland. I don't think you've lived in Scotland for quite a while, and you're calling us and we're dialing in from Buenos Aires in Argentina, which is a first for me. I've had people in Australia, South Africa, the States, Canada, and now all the way from South America. So this is wonderful, and I can't wait to have this conversation.
Good. Me too. Well, do you want me to tell you about how I got to be here?
I'd love to. Yeah, I think it's fascinating how you really kind of, got to be where you are, and really what you're doing now, which we're going to dig into when it comes to helping people write their stories effectively.
Right.
So
Yes.
I'd love for you to go into that for us.
Well, as you say, I do have a Scottish accent. I was born and raised in Scotland. And in my early 20s, I decided to go to Canada, really just for 1 year for a bit of an adventure. And as these things happen, I met my future husband within a few days and stayed. So then I married, and I spent most of my adult life in Canada, in Toronto. And my husband died a number of years ago, and I started to kind of travel around a little bit, see a bit of the world. And I landed in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and just fell in love with it. As soon as I got there, I thought, this is my place. And all these years later, I still feel this is my place. I never want to leave.
Wonderful, amazing. It's somewhere that's on my list to go as a
Is
sports fan, a football fan. I mean,
course.
it's, I don't think there's many atmospheres or passion and emotions as there is in Argentina around
Absolutely
football.
not. And I was here when we won the World Cup 3 years ago.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
insanity.
Yeah, I bet it was amazing. So Helen, tell me, how have you got to kind of where you are in terms of your profession, that your what you do in terms of your work and giving back to people?
Well, for most of my career, when I was in Toronto, I was a professional speaker. And I did keynote speeches and workshops across North America, mainly on communication in the workplace. But when I started to come down to Argentina, logistically, it became a little bit difficult to do that. And while I was speaking, I had written a number of books myself on my area of expertise, which, you're expected to do as a speaker. And so it was kind of a natural thing for me to slide into more away from speaking and more into books. And I had written a number of books of my own. And somebody actually asked me, a fellow speaker asked me if I could help her write a book on her area of expertise, and quite slid into it that way through the side door. And of course, if it wasn't for today's technology, I couldn't do that. But because I can be in Argentina, and my clients can be any place else in the world, and they are. So that's how I came to be here.
And there is a really specific focus, I think, that you have on people at a certain stage of life, starting to think about how they're going to, I mentioned write their story, but it can be anything, right? I mean, what kind of made you focus on people in the second half of their life? And, and I suppose, why do you think that is particularly such a ripe time for people to undertake this particular project of writing down memoirs or stories or engaging in that creative writing process?
Well, I didn't start there. When I got into the business of, because I do two things. I do ghostwriting for people who just want me to tell me their story and have me write it. But mainly I do book coaching for people who want to do it themselves, but they need some help. And when I first got into the book coaching, I was focusing on executives, senior executives, because I was quite familiar with the corporate world and fascinated by people's war stories. And so that's what I did at the beginning. But what I found was the most common complaint that I heard from people was, oh, I would love to write a book, but oh my goodness, I've got absolutely no time. I'm so busy. And they are busy. And so many of them would say, after I retire, this is what I'm going to do. And maybe that's what sowed the seed. And then, honestly, I came across your podcast and I thought, well, this is what I'm talking about, because writing a book is, and this is the second part of your question, is an ideal time retirement is an ideal time to write your book. And it doesn't have to be a memoir. I mean, there are people who for 20 years have been saying, I'm going to write a detective novel. Well, maybe this is the time. Or it can be something that's, my clients are all non-fiction writers, and it could be something to do with your career that you've just finished, which would kind of keep you connected to that. Maybe if you're a CEO and you're retiring, you've got new people coming up, and your book can be sort of a guiding light to those people, sort of a think piece. And then we all have other aspects of our lives besides work and business. Hobbies are a great field to look at if you're deciding to write a book and you're doing it in your retirement years. You're doing this for pleasure more than anything else. It's going to be something that you're going to enjoy. So maybe it's a hobby. Maybe you've been a golfer or a fisherman or a stamp collector or an artist or whatever it is for years, and you have something, knowledge of that you could pass on through a book. And this is an ideal time to be doing that.
What's really interesting to me is you've mentioned three things, or maybe not exactly the words, but I think in the ballpark around experiences, memories, and giving back.
Yes.
And if we just take the fact that we're talking about writing a book out of the equation, and I think you've listened to the podcast, you've heard me talk about this before, and I talk about it to clients all the time. It's this is an ideal opportunity to cultivate meaningful experiences, to get memories in the memory bank, and have those, but also to give back. And something you mentioned there, a lot of people I work with are leaving quite a long, successful career. Yes. And that's a massive part of them. And a lot of them want to feel like they can pass on that wisdom and that knowledge, but they don't want to be in the workplace anymore. And what I'm hearing from you, Helen, is that this could be an amazing thing to do, to be able to have an experience writing it, create memories writing it, because you will, and leave a legacy because you've got something in written form, hard copy, that's going to be around for a long, long time. And you could give back to a particular industry or profession that served you amazingly well during your career.
Absolutely. And there's one thing that I would like to mention, just because you brought up the subject of legacy, and that is, I really believe that the book is not the legacy. The book is not the legacy. What you leave behind is the legacy. The career, the company you built, the family you raised, the traveling that you did, and the experiences, that is your legacy. The book is the container, if you will, for the legacy. And taking it back to the business world for a moment, I actually wrote a business fable a few years ago called The Book That Saved the Legacy. And that was about, this fellow who was talking about writing a book for years and never got round to it. And this is what can happen if you don't write the story. Either it won't be written and you'll be forgotten, or somebody else will write it and they might not get it right. Whereas if you write this, then it will honor and safeguard your legacy, because you're telling the story as it was, because you were there.
Yeah, those two words are brilliant. Honor and safeguard. I love that. That's what you're doing by getting it into paper form. I think, in a world that is going more and more digital, it feels like books become more and more meaningful in my mind.
I think they do. And I mean, I'm not against digital books. And actually, I live in Argentina. It's hard to find English language books around here. So I'm very happy to have my digital reader. But for this purpose, where you're talking about writing a memoir, for example, or, some people do it for their families because they feel that, my family doesn't know half of the things that have happened to me in my life, and I would like them to know. Well, you really want that to be a nice book. A nice looking book with your picture on the front and your name on the front as the author. So yeah, print versions I think are ideal for this purpose.
Yeah. Just kind of before we go into the next bit, which I can't wait to get into, I've got a couple of really good questions that I'm curious to hear your answer on. Just kind of bringing it back to experiences. Let's just unpack that, because I think a lot of listeners have heard me talk about this, and I'd love to hear your view on connecting the two, i.e. they're probably going, how does writing a book qualify as an experience, maybe not just a task or a thing? What's your view on how writing a book can definitely be an experience that you undertake?
Oh, it's definitely an experience. It's not a task. It's many tasks all put together, but it's not a task. I think of it as an adventure. Going into this is something, especially if you've never done anything like this before, you're retired, you've got this time and you're able to do it. And I recommend to people at the beginning, because before you even put pen to paper or get on the keyboard or anything, you have a lot of pondering to do. There's a lot of thinking. If this is a new idea, there might be people listening to us today thinking, whoa, I never thought about writing a book, but now the seed has been sown, so you're thinking about it. So there's a lot of thinking that you need to do before you actually do anything. And so think about what kind of book, why am I writing this book? Who's going to read it? And what kind of book should I write? And this can take some time. I recommend, because one of the things you will need to do when you start writing your book is to plan your time and block out the time when you're going to actually do the writing of the book. This is your opportunity to start that process. Pick out a certain amount of time, 10 o'clock in the morning, go into the den with your cup of tea and just your notebook or your computer or your recording device, and just start thinking, get it out there, stream of consciousness, ideas about what your book is going to be. And I can guarantee you, Dan, that if you do that, it will get you excited and it will add to this adventurous aspect of the whole thing. And then once you start doing it, you'll realize it's also a lot of work. It's a big undertaking writing a book. Even if you work with somebody like me to help you, it's still a lot of work. This is where I believe that it's more an adventure and experience rather than just, don't even think of it as a task, because that'll kind of put you off before you start. I was interviewed on another podcast one day, and the woman said, why should I even bother writing a book? And I said, you see, let's get rid of this word bother. It's not a bother. Think of it more, this is why I like adventure. Think of it as a positive endeavor that you're going to be working on.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, one of the things that's striking me is it actually fulfills two big things in what I call kind of the big five of retirement. Purpose and identity are two of those big five. And if we think about writing a book, it gives you purpose to get out of bed in the morning. It gives you purpose to start to think and to maybe research and delve and interview and talk to people and etc. It also gives you a bit of an identity, right? I mean, you can call yourself an author. If someone says to you, what do you do? It's like, well, I'm writing a book at the moment, right? That's a great thing to have. I think it also builds relationships. If you're writing a book about, you talked about the detective thing, you might want to go and interview a retired detective to get and you start making friends and your social connections start broadening. And it's just hitting me as we're talking. I think about purpose and identity and relationships and structure and well-being. It keeps the brain sharp. It keeps you, it really ticks a huge amount of boxes that we all know that retirees struggle with on an emotional and psychological level when they step away from work.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that once you start to actually work on your book, to actually write your book, it changes your identity. It changes how you feel about yourself. And we all know people that have been saying for years, I'm going to write a book, or yes, I'm writing a book, but they're never going to finish it. But following the process that we're talking about now, you will finish it because you'll want to. It'll be this adventure. It'll be this new big chunk out of all this newfound time that you've got in your life. And it's something meaningful. It's not, I absolutely hate, Dan, to hear people say that they want something to pass the time. I think it's just so sad to be looking for something to pass the time. This is not that. This is something to focus on and to give your time to.
Time's interesting. I mean, I'm fascinated by time. I've spoken, written, and looked at it a lot. And you and I have mentioned it quite a bit. One of the things that I think a lot of listeners might say, or a couple of things, is number one, I've never written, and it sounds interesting, but I've never written anything before. I don't know whether I can. I'm not that creative. All of these little excuses that come out potentially. So even when people have time, what does stop people from getting started? Are there common threads that you see that just get in the way and prevent people from just starting the process? And then just kind of off the back of that, what's your process, or what are some tips have you got to help people get unstuck and overcome that self-doubt that they might have to just put pen to paper?
Well, I think really, if it comes right down to it, it's fear. People will give all kinds of reasons and all kinds of excuses, but really it's fear. And they're afraid that they won't be able to do it. They're afraid that they won't be able to write. They're afraid they'll get stuck and they won't be able to continue. They're afraid that everybody's waiting for them to finish and they're not getting on with it. It's all really, it's perfectly natural. It's not something that they've done before. It's all brand new. There are many people who, in the course of their careers, write, and they do write, and some of them write very well, but they've never written a book. And so that's a whole different thing. This, of course, is what I do. This is where I come into the picture as a coach, because the first conversation that I have with a new client is quite lengthy, and it focuses on, why are you writing the book? Why are you writing it now? And what book are you going to write? Because this also, I think, stops people. And I have known people to start and write and get through halfway through the process and realize, I don't care about this book. I don't know why I'm writing this book. This is not the book that I want to write at all. I can help you not go down that path because we talk it through from the beginning. I also had a client fairly recently who is a good writer and had started the process on her own and then came to me just to kind of help her get through the process. And within about 4 or 5 chapters, I said to her, do you know what? I think you're writing 2 books here. You're writing them like one, but there's actually 2 books. And the second one is getting in the way of the first one. And as soon as I said it, she realized that I was right. And so I recommended that she have a kind of a parking lot and put notes and ideas and everything for the second book away, and then bring her focus back and stick to the first one. So, it sounds silly, make sure you're writing the right book, but it's actually not. And the conversation that we have at the beginning is quite enlightening for people who have never written a book before.
And you mentioned ghostwriting. I think, also you can write a book but not write the book, right? That's another thing. I think there are a lot of people that feel uncomfortable in language, but are very comfortable in spoken or creative. There's ideas. And I think that's where working with someone like you really comes into its own. It's like, well, here's the ideas. Here's the things I want to talk about. I've done something for so long. I've got so much to give back, and I can, dictate stories, and I've got anecdotes, and I've got, all of this wisdom that you can literally just dump on someone and then work with them to create the thing that you want.
Ghostwriting is a collaboration. The thing that people should know about ghostwriting is, just because somebody else is doing the heavy lifting of the writing, it doesn't mean that you're off the hook. You don't just say, okay, Helen, here it is, you write it, and I'll go away and play golf. No, you can't. That's not it. It is a collaboration, and there's a lot of discussion, and some of it's done recorded, and some of there's just the different ways of doing it, and it depends on the client, basically what the client wants. But what I find is, especially with ghostwriting, is that a lot of my job is interviewing, and you might start to tell me stories. Say you've got one story that you like and you want to make sure this goes in your book. But the thing is, you know it so well, and you've probably told it so many times that you don't always say it all. There's bits that you might miss out. But because I'm hearing it for the first time, I can say to you, well, wait a minute, I didn't understand. Well, what happened to Auntie Mary? You didn't say she was coming to the picnic, and so on. And that reminds you and brings in the rich details that you may have forgotten. And that's where somebody like a ghostwriter can actually be a great collaborator. And ghostwriting, I should say this, I say this to everybody, just in case anybody's wondering, ghostwriting is not cheating. It's really not, because of the work that's put into it by both parties. And in the end, it's your book, it's your story, it's your voice. Because as a ghostwriter, that's one thing I learned to do, is to write in somebody else's voice. And it is your book, and you are absolutely entitled to call yourself the author of the book, even if it's been ghostwritten.
Yeah. What's fascinating to me is the language that I use around retirement to really start to bring it to life, to humanize it, is to talk about stories. So I talk about people metaphorically writing their next chapter in a way that, we need to think of retirement very differently now. This is not, a destination. It's not the end. It's the start of something. So you're turning over the page from your chapter that you had around career or work or whatever that looks like, and you're going into the next chapter of life. So, and that resonates a lot with people because they want to make sure that they continue their journey to write their story. And what I think is really interesting is that you can bring that to life, can't you? I mean, there's a physical, as we said, that, you are turning over the page, you are going into the next chapter of life, but you can physically write this thing down and talk about what that means. And I think that's such an amazing thing to be able to do that just doesn't come on the radar of people that could, and I think should. I'm thinking of so many people that I work with that are wonderful, wonderful people that have got so much wisdom and so much knowledge that would be wonderful sitting in a book for people to read and to take forward. And I just encourage everyone listening to just start to think about what that might look like for them.
Absolutely.
What surprises you the most, or what surprises your clients that you work with or people that you see write a book once they start writing? So we've talked about the fear to get started. What happens when they get started? Is there a different reaction? Is there kind of, I wish I'd have done this 10 years ago type thing?
Sometimes when we have our first conversation, which I say is usually at least 2 hours, and at the end of it, people are always surprised that, my goodness, it's been 2 hours. This was great. This was fascinating. Yes, because we're talking about you and you never get the chance to talk about you, but now we are. And I think that the thing that surprises people the most is to realize just how interesting their story really is. Because we all have interesting stories. We just all don't know which parts of our lives are interesting to other people. But because of the process and because of my interviewing them and asking them the questions, they sometimes think, oh, wow, that really is quite interesting. And sometimes that can be personal stories. Sometimes it can be business stories. I mean, I encourage people that have had a long, successful career to write a business memoir where they talk about the success of their company and how they brought it to where it is. I love reading books like that myself. And that's another thing where I didn't even think about talking about that because I didn't think it would be interesting, but by Jove, it really is.
Yeah. No, I think it kind of leads me on to just thinking about the wonderful thing called imposter syndrome, right? And I think we all suffer from this a lot.
Yeah.
And that reaction of who the hell will be interested in my story? Who, little old me working for little old thing, or what? You don't have to be this hugely successful person. Even if you are, lots of those people have huge amounts of imposter syndrome.
Yes.
So I think that's definitely, who would be interested in this? And I suppose that brings me on to the bit around kind of fiction, non-fiction work. So, if you are someone who is going to write non-fiction, maybe something about your career or your knowledge or your wisdom, I would imagine that imposter syndrome can be quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Quite intense. And it could be something that really holds you back in doing this, as opposed to maybe writing fiction where you're kind of going, are you interested in my concept or my creativity, not in me, which I think is quite interestingly to balance out as a human being thinking about putting your work out into the world.
I've never thought of it that way, but you're right. I mean, writing fiction is a different thing altogether. But what I would say is once you start actually doing the writing, and I can only speak for people that I work with. I don't know how people get on with this if they're laboring all by themselves. But when they're working with me, the actual process of doing the writing and getting it down on paper can actually help get rid of the imposter syndrome. Because you realize, my goodness, the person who did this was a person worth listening to. So writing the actual process of writing a book does amazing things for a person.
Yeah. And the process, I think, maybe of the outcome is obviously wonderful. I mean, I see it all the time where people film themselves opening up the package that have got their printed book. And
yes.
I mean, there's not that much more I see in terms of people's joy and happiness that they have when it's like, look at this is the thing that I've done, right? I mean, how amazing is this? And so I look at it like, the journey of happiness that you would go on can be, I would imagine, really, really lovely in a way that, there's a bit of toil, but you do very well and you get happier and you see the book, and the book then comes into physical print, people start buying it, which you go think, oh my God, people are, and then you might get some nice reviews or feedback. And I can imagine, not just writing the book, but the aftermath of it can be so liberating for many.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a trip. It really is a trip, Dan. And in fact, sometimes it leads you into wanting to write another one
Yeah,
as soon
yeah,
as you finish it, because you're sort of on a high from all this. And what
yeah.
else could I write?
Yeah. So my wife is a very keen runner, and it's a bit like running marathons, isn't it? It's kind of like in the immediate, whilst you're training, and you have that really, you think, why am I doing this? All the slogging. Then you go and run the London Marathon, and the high of doing it, followed by, I'm never doing this again. It's been hard work. 2 weeks later, you're going, I need to run another marathon. It's kind of because it's all been everyone's commented on my photo saying well done, and I've raised money for charity, and it's that kind of journey, right?
Yes, it is. It is. It's a good analogy, actually, because they talk about the runner's wall and how difficult it can be in the middle. In the world of writing, we talk about the muddy middle,
Right.
because when
Yeah.
you start, like, there's three energies you need to write a book. There's the opening energy, the middle energy, and the finishing energy. And it's kind of like a race. But that part in the middle is when you can get really stuck. And that's when you lie in bed at night and think, what am I thinking? Why am I doing this? Nobody's ever going to read this book. But it's one thing that you should know is that even well-known professional authors who sell gazillion books still get stuck in the muddy middle and wonder whether the book's any good.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just have to, that's why somebody like me, part of my job is to keep pushing you on, is to keep getting you through that and helping you to get through that part and into the joyous finishing energy that comes at the end.
Brilliant. So you've mentioned some styles of books and kinds of books. I'd love to spend a few minutes for the audience, particularly if they're thinking about, this has piqued their interest, or they might be listening, having thought about this anyway. You've mentioned stuff like memoirs or business book, leadership book, how-to books. I suppose a couple of questions really. Is there a typical book that people end up writing in retirement, or is it just personality or driven? And what do give us a snippet as to what a memoir looks like. What are the really good things that people should start to bring into their thoughts when thinking about what type of book they want to write?
Well, the kind of book that you write kind of depends on why you're writing it. And I mean, the why question is the number one question anyway, that you ask yourself right at the beginning. And for example, many people, I'm sure that your people will understand this. Many people, when they retire from their main career, they move into another secondary career or a business of their own. I mean, two of the ones that come to mind are consulting and professional speaking. Both of these endeavors lend themselves to a book. In fact, when I went into professional speaking, I was told right at the beginning, you have to write a book. And you do. But if you have a book as a consultant, you're just new into this field. But a book gives you instant credibility and helps to raise any reputation that you might have. So if you're doing the book in that case to support the new business. So that might take you into writing a leadership book or a how-to book, lessons learned, or even a business memoir. So that would be that way. If you don't really have something like that to move into, you just like the idea of writing a book, I think that the obvious thing to look at is other things in your life besides business. As I mentioned before, it could be a hobby that you're interested in, something that you've maybe done for years. And, well, you could write a book that teaches other people how to do it, or teaches people how to get the most out of a certain type of hobby. Can be a family thing. I mean, if you've got grandchildren that you're surrounded by all the time, that before you saw them once a week and now you've got them there all the time, there's lessons to be learned from that. That's a different life that you've taken on. And it can really, if you've got the kind of writing skills, you can write a humorous book about something like that, about suddenly having all these little people all around you. So that's another option. It's something completely different. How-to books will never go out of style because there's always people want to learn how to do something. And sometimes I've had people say, oh, well, yeah, but I mean, there's 1,000 books on this subject out there already. We don't need another one. Wrong. If you're interested in something, you don't just read one book, you read every book that comes out on the subject. There is
Exactly.
room for another one. There's room for yours.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a testament to that. I've got nearly £700 worth of books in my Amazon basket. Like I just keep, you just see a book, I'm interested, it's in, I'll get, you are interested in these books, you'll get them, you'll read them, you'll see them, which I think's, yeah. Do you see, and this is coming from just a personal friend of mine who retired and wrote a children's book.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, a lot of people think of a book as this kind of, I don't know, pick a word, 80,000 words, big page type novel.
Right, right.
It can be, it can be illustrative. It can be
It is.
children's. It can be, and I think that's really interesting to go down that road. It's like, I know someone that actually retired as being a financial advisor and wrote a money-based book for
For
young
children.
children. So, giving back in a way to start some education for young people to start thinking about money. I mean, all of that is, could be really interesting for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, again, it's just letting the creative things take flow, right? It doesn't need to be this long textbook. It can be anything you want to make it.
And actually, long books are kind of out of favour now, to be honest. I don't
Mm,
know if people ever really wanted £5 books, but I always say to people, even if you're writing a business book, and the example I use because I was working a lot with accountants in Canada, and I said, if I come to you and I'm a business person in Canada and I want to open a branch plant in the United States, I don't want to know everything you know about international business. I want to know, how's this going to affect my taxes?
yeah.
That's all you need to write about in the book. A book doesn't have to be this size, it can be this size
Mm,
if
mm.
it's got the real information in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's quickly just touch back on time in a way that, everything we've talked about, it could really spur people on. How do you balance that ambition with a realism? I would imagine there are some people that go, you know, I really want to get on, and they get so enthusiastic, but reality hits about the work that it takes to do this. How do you think about balancing that, and how long might it typically take for someone to go, actually, I've got this idea and I'd love to bring it to life?
Well, it's really important that people understand and are realistic. I had a client once a few years ago who dropped out, and I knew he was going to because I told him at the beginning, you cannot write the book in such a short time. You'll burn yourself out. And he wouldn't listen to me. I went ahead and he started and he burned out. And he said, I don't know if he ever finished the book, but he never finished it with me. You do have to understand that there is time involved and effort. What I say to people is, and there isn't a typical amount of time that it takes because there's so many variables. When I start to work with somebody as a coach or even as a ghostwriter, I will say to them, let's shoot for doing this in 6 months. It might take a wee bit longer, it might take a wee bit less, but let's shoot for doing it in 6 months because I know that can work for me. So in this meaty first conversation that we have, we go through this process of trying to figure out exactly how you're going to fit it into your life. And the first thing is, how long do you want the book to be? And people always say so many pages, but in the world of books, we don't count pages, we count words. And so my recommendation is pull a book off your shelf or off a shelf in a bookshop that looks about the size or the kind of book that you might want to write. So just open it up at a random page and count the number of words across a line and the number of lines in a page. Do the arithmetic. That tells you how many words are on a page, how many pages are in it. Now you have a rough count of how many words are in this particular book. And you can think, yeah, that sounds right for me. And 30 to 80,000 words is very acceptable today for the length of the kind of book we're talking about. So that's the first thing that you do. So now I'll say to you, okay, when do you want the manuscript finished? Let's not count about when you're going to get it printed or anything like that. When you want the manuscript finished? And let's say you say 6 months from now. Okay, so now we know that by this date, 6 months, so many weeks down the road, you are going to write X number of words. Divide it into the number of weeks. And now you know each week You can bring it down to days, but I wouldn't at the beginning. I would keep it at a week. So now you know that every week you're going to have to write X number of words, and submitting them to me is part of the process to keep you accountable. And then the next question becomes, and this speaks exactly to your question, how are you going to fit it into your life? So, I mean, you might think, well, it's only 500 words. That won't take me long. Well, maybe not. But at the beginning, it might, because you've got to think about what these 500 words are. Or you might think, 2,000 words, I can do that in a week. Okay, so you're submitting to Helen on Friday morning, and on Thursday night, you're still trying to write the 2,000 words because you didn't plan it. You need to know, do you have substantial blocks of time in your day that you can give to the book? And you can tell all your family and everybody, you know, you don't talk to me on Thursdays from 9 until 11 or whatever it is, because I'm working on my book. And if you can do that, then you can easily figure out how you're going to get those words written, because they'll be in that time. The book that I wrote a number of years ago, I found that I was having a lot of trouble with it. I just wasn't flowing. I wasn't getting it done. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to change where I do this. So I started every day at 4 o'clock. I would take an hour. I used to call it my authorly hour. And I'd take that hour, but I went to the local coffee shop and I didn't look at my emails. I didn't talk to anybody. I did nothing except work on the book. And I'm not going to say it wrote itself, but it was certainly became a lot more easy. So because it was the center focus for that 1 hour every week. You might not have that ability to do that, but you know, maybe you can have 15 minutes here or there. You know, I'm going to the school to pick up my kid at 4 o'clock. Get there at 3:30. Spend half an hour on your book. You don't have to have your computer. You can talk it. You can write notes on your notebook or so on, but work on your book for that half hour. That time adds up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It takes time, but you can find time if you plan it properly to fit the rest of your life.
Yeah. I think one thing I've noticed when I write, just doing kind of blogs and things like that, it's, you know, to write 500 words, you might write 1,500, you know, because
Yes.
you like, and that's the thing for me. It's like, actually, you write loads, delete some, write some, delete some. That will kind of make, so it's not a linear thing, right? To get
No,
500 good words that you really want to like, that make sense and flow, can take writing 2,000 of them to get it down to that.
that's
That's
right.
kind of how I've felt a lot.
It's true. And the other thing that you do need to know, and if you've never written a book before, you need to know this, that no matter how well you have written all your words, the book must be edited. At the end of it, it should be preferred. I'm an editor. I edit for other people, but I don't edit my books. I need an editor to do that. And so that kind of takes the pressure off people, because they realize they don't have to write it doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to be edited afterwards.
Yeah. So just, I suppose one question on that theme that I'd love to ask is, and you've shared a little bit about this, but just to kind of wrap it up and maybe get it in a more, I suppose, succinct sentence from you. What's your approach to helping someone take that vague idea then to publish work? Because you've mentioned a few things, but I think a lot of people will have that idea but struggle to think how that idea translates into a book. Is there a framework, or is there just kind of a couple of things that, and obviously working with you is point number one, that would be great, but is there other things that people can just think about around, you know, how to maybe not even publish work, Helen, maybe just getting the idea into something that feels a bit more like written work?
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of talked about this a little bit when I talked about the first thing that you're doing when you've decided to write your book is not actually writing. It's a lot of thinking and
Yeah.
wondering and pondering. And sometimes you'd be surprised at what is in your own head about what to do with the book, with the information. But unless you have the conversation with yourself or with somebody like me, you won't necessarily get that information out. But once you start thinking about, why do I want to write this book? And why is it this book? And who's going to read this book? Who do I really want? What do I want the job of this book to be? Who do I want to read it, and what do I want them to think or feel at the end of when they finish reading it? Once you answer those questions for yourself, then it leads you naturally into the next step.
Yeah. No, I love that. You can be an author writing a book, but actually your most productive work might not be writing.
No, it might
You know,
not.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. Writing a book, or writing it, for me anyway, it has been pretty transformational, right? I think it's a pretty transformational thing for a lot of people. In your opinion, how does the act of writing change people? What does it do for them when they start doing this?
Well, I think the discipline of actually sitting down and doing it proves to people that they have the discipline and that they can do it. And especially if they've never done it before, that they can actually sit down and do something that takes skills that they never knew they had. So the act of writing brings that to the fore. It's certainly, I think if you look at it broadly, it's very good for your self-esteem. The fact, I had a cousin once many years ago. She's passed away now, but she did nothing her entire life but edit books. She was a professional editor with a company in England. And she said to me, I said to her, "Oh, Chris, everybody wants to write a book." And she said, "No, Helen, everybody wants to have written a book."
Very good. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. To be honest, I mean, I think that mindset actually is, a lot of people have that mindset in life, don't they? It's kind of like, it's kind of, I want the outcome. I'm not sure whether I want the work involved to get the
Right.
outcome, which I think's, yeah, yeah. Thinking about impact and transformation of books, then, have you got a story that you can share with us where, one of your clients' books, or maybe one of your books, has gone on to really impact people? Is there anything stand out that you can share with us?
I was thinking about this, and the story, this may not be the kind of story that you're looking for, but it's one of my favorite things. I ghost wrote a book just before I left Canada to move down here. And the subject was a lady who was approaching her 90th birthday. And apparently she had said many times that there were things in her life that were wonderful and that she wished that her family knew about them. But she'd never done anything about it. She didn't know what to do about it. So her family clubbed together and they bought me my services, my ghostwriting services, for her 90th birthday. And so I went to her home and I interviewed her several times, and together we collaborated, and I wrote the book and I helped her to get it designed so that it was a lovely book. And so at the birthday party, everybody got a copy of the book with Grandma's picture on the front and her name there. Everybody was blown away, of course, that it was just this wonderful thing that had happened. And 2 years later, I had an opportunity to speak to the daughter who had actually hired me. And I kind of wasn't sure whether to ask about her mother because she was 90. I didn't know she'd be still around, but I did. I said, "How's your mum?" And she said, "She's just finished her second book. And this one
So
she's done
good.
completely on her own."
So good.
Isn't that marvelous? I mean, she just
Unbelievable.
got so much joy out of having that first one. And she was telling me the stories. I was writing them. So this time she thought, well, I'll tell the stories and I'll just write them myself. So,
I
I think
love
it's a
that.
wonderful, but don't wait till you're 90. Don't,
No,
don't,
no,
don't
no, no.
wait till you're 90. Get started now.
And what a wonderful gift as well. What a wonderful gift. It's kind of,
Yes.
yeah, I think that's unbelievable. Fascinating. I love that. What a great story. Helen, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I know it's something different for the listeners and something I think truly valuable, and something that a lot of people will take a lot of value from, but also I think take a lot of inspiration to think about, this could be part of their second act, part of their next chapter is doing this. So,
I would be thrilled to think that I had helped people see it that way.
yeah, no, listen, you've massive impact on me, and no doubt that you've done that. For people that are listening and thinking, right, Helen's had a huge impact. Maybe I could go and write this book. What would you say to them?
Well, I actually have a gift that I am offering to your people who are listening to the program today, and it's in two parts. The first thing is I have written a short, simple guide on how to write a memoir. Now, I realize that not everybody wants to do a memoir, but the information in this book is transferable to other types of book as well. But it's a simple guide on how to write a memoir. If you would like to have that, send me an email, and I believe you'll put the address in the show notes, but it's helen@theexecutivesbookcoach.com. Send me an email, and in the subject line, just put memoir guide, and I will send you the PDF of this guide. And then after you've had an opportunity to read the guide, I will then offer you a free 20-minute exploratory conversation that we can have of coming out of either the guide, or maybe you say, well, this is fine, but I want to write a different kind of book. We can use the 20 minutes to talk about that. Any aspect of book writing that I can give you that will help jumpstart for you and get you started on your book, I am more than delighted to do.
What a wonderful offer. Thank you so much. Listen, I'll put your email address, that particular kind of offer, and I'll make sure front and center in the show notes. So for anyone listening, I strongly recommend you take Helen up on that. Get the guide, read that, reach out to Helen, and have 20 minutes of her wisdom to help you on that journey. I think it's such a wonderful offer. Thank you. I think that's brilliant for people listening.
You're welcome, Dan. My pleasure.
As we wrap up, Helen, I've got one final question for you.
Okay.
And as someone who's written lots of books, stood on stage and talked and edited and read books, this might be really impossible to answer. What's your favorite book that you've either written or that you've read?
It is impossible to answer that with one. How about if I give you three?
Amazing. I tried to push the envelope, but three is fantastic.
So one is one of my own books because it gave me a lot of pleasure to write it. It's a memoir of some of my early days in Argentina. It's called Rare Steak, Red Wine, Hot Tango.
Oh,
and
perfect.
I've had a lot of pleasure out of writing it, and a lot of people have got in touch with me after they've read it, and I've got some new friends from it. So that's one of my favorites. If we're talking about fiction, the fiction book, it's tried and true. The classic is Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen. I have read that book so many times. And it's written in Jane Austen's language of the time. And I've got kind of an ear that picks up on language. And my mother used to say to me, I always know when you're reading that book because it changes the way you talk. And then there's the nonfiction. I mean, there are so many of these. I read just so many. I think anything by... No, that's not right either. I'm kind of stumped.
Maybe I knew this was going to be impossible for you. Maybe one that you think would be impactful for people listening. Maybe what is there a book that you think that could be that you'd encourage people to read that are listening to maybe think about anything really?
Yes. There is a book, and it's kind of aspirational. It might end up when you're writing a book, it might not, but it's entertaining. It'll give you a lot of information. And I think it's called The Art of Writing, and it's by Stephen King, who wrote all those horrific novels.
Okay.
And he's an excellent nonfiction writer as well. So I think it's called The Art of Writing, but it's definitely by Stephen King, and I would recommend that to anybody.
I'll make sure I get it right and put it in the show notes and everything.
Thank you.
Helen, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking time out of your rare steak and red wine. That actually, I don't know, what time is it now? You probably won't be doing that, right? So it's
2:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah, well, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's the thing that you do for lunch. So I massively appreciate your time, your knowledge and your wisdom, your very kind offer for the listeners. And yeah, look, it's been such a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. It's been my pleasure.
And that just leaves me to thank everyone once again for tuning in and listening with us to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Until next time, take care.